I'll start things off by Chip and Dale. My favorite movie this year so far. I'm not even kidding. I don't know exactly why. It was just everything I love. I love kitchen sink style movies. It was Ready Player One meets Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It was that style of just, I mean, even Free Guy just threw in all these different references and Easter eggs, which usually isn't a recipe for an excellent plot and everything like that, but it's absolute fan service to me because I absolutely die for that shit. And the movie itself was actually pretty good too. It was a pretty good story, I thought. Spoiler alert if you care about the probably going to be the number one kids movie of 2022. I don't know what else is coming out this year. They got the gay Buzz Lightyear. DC Super Pets actually looks awesome. I don't know, but I think this is probably going to be in the running for the best kids movie anyways. And it was entertaining for adults too, not just because I'm childish and I like kids movies, but there was plenty of actual adult references like drug use and different hilarious things like that. So I'll talk about my thoughts about just the overall idea of the movie going to streaming instead of going to theaters. I know that that's becoming the normal nowadays, but it's still kind of surprising, especially for a movie like this. I'll touch on that a little bit more, and I'll touch on some of the other things. I'll just give the details of it real quick. Let's see if I can pull it up here. It's directed by the guy, one of the guys from The Lonely Island, and one of the other guys, Andy Samberg, is obviously one of the voices in it. He's got one of the most recognizable voices nowadays. Kiva Schaffer, I don't know. He's the middle guy, I guess, in The Lonely Island. That's what I would consider him, because in my mind, I place him in order, but I guess a lot of people probably won't know who I'm talking about. He's not the little... Oh, where'd it go? Sorry, my shit's fucking with me today. All right, so, yeah, Andy Samberg, John Mulaney, Kiki Lane. I think Kiki Lane must have been, yeah, that's Ellie. So she plays a real-life person. She plays a cop who helps them in their adventure. Will Arnett voices Peter Pan, who grows up and turns into, like, an alcoholic, which apparently is what, not only an alcoholic, but a real, like, sleazebag criminal. And apparently that happened to the kid voice actor that voiced Peter Pan in the original. So a lot of people are pissed off about the what would you call it, insinuations or something like that take place with that character, but I think they probably just picked a character. But if they did do it in purpose because of the parallels between the real life guy and the character in the movie, then that's absolutely hilarious and awesome. But obviously it's going to piss people off because it's a little fucked up at the same time. That sucks. His hand just fell off. I'll have to fix that later. Eric Bana voices Monterey Jack. He's another one of the main characters. He actually goes missing. I'll get into the plot of the movie, and I'll explain his role in it, I guess. Let's see, who else is in this? Keegan-Michael Key's got a voice. The Allstate guy's in there. He's got a voice. Seth Rogen doesn't just have a voice. He actually has a character. It's one of those like shitty CGI characters that doesn't make eye contact, that looks in one direction no matter who he's talking to. One of those things. That was pretty funny. Let's see. J.K. Simmons has a voice as the police detective, the lead guy who turns out to be a bad guy. There are a ton of people shoved into this thing, and I don't know who else. I just got a short list there. So guess we'll just start with that. Those are the main characters. We also had Ugly Sonic was in there, which, you know, this movie, I looked earlier. Apparently this movie had been in production since 2014. Usually what that means was actually the ideas started getting floated around and they started hiring people and stuff like that. This movie itself probably was in what they call development hell for like 10 years, and then, well, not 10 years, but like, I guess 8 years probably. No. Let's see, math right, 6 years. And then they just started getting the ball rolling on it within the last couple of years because of all the very recent references and things like that in it. This thing was probably cooking for a while before they decided to put it out. The movie's about cartoons, like movie characters and TV shows, both of them. They exist in real life. So like Chip and Dale were still the stars of Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, but they weren't. They were playing characters, but they were actually real people, I guess, too. But they lived in the non-animated world. And so they even make a reference because they did like do the modernized update look like what they did with Garfield or Alvin and the Chipmunks. They did that to Dale. And they made the joke that he got the CGI surgery. And it's like everybody knows, like obviously a reference to plastic surgery. And that was pretty hilarious. And there's different things like that sprinkled in throughout. Like all these old cartoons were all at like a Comic-Con convention with like no fans talking to them or anything. A lot like what you find nowadays when you go to a Comic-Con and there's a ton of TV stars from like the 2000s that nobody cares about or even knows who they are, but they all kind of talk to each other and they're talking shit and stuff like that. And they had Lumiere from Beauty and the Beast was one of them. That's where Ugly Sonic was. I'm trying to remember who else. But basically, Chip and Dale go their set. It starts with them meeting in like preschool or kindergarten or something, and then maybe it was junior high. I don't know. They're meeting as kids, then they go on to go to Hollywood and get this successful show. And then Dale doesn't like how he's becoming the butt of all the jokes and he's the stupid one. So he tries to go out on his own solo project and it ends up ruining Chip and Dale. So they go their separate ways. 20 years later, they don't talk to each other at all. No one from the show talks to each other. And then Dale's doing this Comic-Con thing, trying to still be a celebrity. But Chip has gone on to sell insurance. Which reminds me of a couple stories that I might get to if I have enough time in this show tonight, because that is, if you look at some of these old movies or old TV shows, there are some stars who were children who stayed in Hollywood, but a lot of them got into a lot of trouble, and then there's other people that totally did a lot of money because he's addicted to cheese, and so he can't afford to pay his dealers, I guess. And so what happens in that situation is you get kidnapped by Peter Pan, and he will disfigure you and change you up, and then basically, what's the word I'm looking for here? I guess just enslave you as a bootleg film character now. And so that's happening to Monterey Jack. So Chip and Dale have to team up together to go after him. That's basically the gist of the movie. Obviously, there's a ton of other fun shit thrown in there. And yeah, I guess that's it for the plot, really. I'm trying to think. I loved it though, and my kids loved it too, but I think I obviously enjoyed it more because my kids aren't at the point where they understand references. Obviously, when characters from some of the other shit they watched showed up, they got all excited about that, as did I. And this thing was chock full of references from every studio, every network. There was a reference to like Jimmy Neutron and Rugrats, so like shit that's not even Disney. And then there was like live action movies referenced, like Jurassic Park and Transformers, and there was a ton of shit that even I was like, okay, this is probably a reference, but even I didn't understand it. So I was reading through an Easter egg list that they put together for like Hollywood Reporter and some of those other outlets whenever there's a movie like this. And yeah, so that's basically it for the movie. As far as this being my favorite film of the year so far, there wasn't a really high bar for that. I haven't really loved a movie, I don't think, until this one. I really enjoyed Scream. I really enjoyed Shut-In. Uncharted was fun. Batman, obviously, Doctor Strange. But I had issues with all of those movies. I didn't have any issues with this movie, and obviously you're not supposed to watch a kid's movie and like try to pick it apart and find shit that you hate or something. But I didn't, and obviously I would do that because that's just what I do when I watch movies for whatever reason. I just can't have a good time. I've got to pick everything apart, and this thing was just nonstop nostalgia. Basically, showed me everything I wanted to see, so I never had to look at it that deeply and go, wait a minute, that's a stupid plot point. Why'd they do that? And I would do that watching a kid's movie, which is why my kids don't like watching movies with me. But as far as just the outer details of this movie, I think this was a good thing for Disney Plus, but at the same time, this would have totally crushed it at the box office, I think, if they would have marketed it correctly, because these kind of movies obviously always do well. The only one that I keep going back to is Ready Player One, and I already mentioned Free Guy, but I know there's more. I'm trying to think of them. I think I'd thought of a couple of them earlier. But the movies that just put the universes together, and I'm not talking about like MCU style put the universe together. I'm talking about like Shrek, basically, where you got all these characters from. In Shrek, it's stories, but in these kind of movies, it's film and other areas of culture. Speaking of which, Paul Rudd has a cameo in there, which is absolutely hilarious. And I think that they probably made the decision to put this on Disney Plus within the last year or so. And I don't know how long this movie's been cooking, but like I said, there's some references that were pretty recent. So I feel like they were working on it up until very recently. And I think it was probably in 2020 they decided which movies they were planning on putting in theaters after the whole Mulan thing and which ones were going to streaming. And so they should have adjusted that decision, I think. I don't know how they made that choice, but right now people are going to the movies again. Doctor Strange just passed 800 million. I think it's the number one movie right now. Or no, number one movie for the whole year. We'll get to box office in a sec. But I don't see how this movie wouldn't have done extremely well. And they could have given it like a 30-day theatrical window, or I think they're doing 45-day theatrical window, and then putting it on. That's what they're doing for HBO. They could have done the same thing with Disney Plus. I know it takes a while for something to come out on Disney Plus. I think Black Widow took about 3 or 4 months. It was much longer than 45 days. They could have done the same thing. I mean, I know a lot of people were talking about this movie because of Ugly Sonic and things like that. It was trending on Twitter on and off throughout the entire weekend since it came out on Thursday night. I woke up on Friday and people were already talking about it, which means that there was people that, depending on where they live, for me it's 1 a.m., so it's not that bad. But there was people in parts of this country that woke up right at midnight California time so that they could watch this fucking thing. And that surprised me because I saw the trailers and I was like, oh, I'll like that. I'll watch that. That looks funny. Because that's how I react to basically every kid's movie. I love taking my kids to shit and watching shit with them. And so I see this, and I'm like, oh, there doesn't seem to be anything absurdly woke or pushy or anything like that. We'll definitely check that one out. But I was not super amped up that I wanted to get up at midnight to watch it, but people clearly were. And that energy clearly would have transitioned onto the big screen, I think. So I don't know why they made the decision to put this on Disney Plus. I can't see anybody coming to Disney Plus to watch this specifically. Maybe if you were teetering on the edge of buying a subscription, you're trying to make that decision, but you hadn't yet, then you heard this is good. This might make you pull the trigger because you hear about how funny this is, or you're a fan of Ugly Sonic, which that's the other thing. Some of these references, it's not built on a single reference, which is good because there's plenty that are meant for like a very niche crowd. Like my wife didn't get the whole Ugly Sonic thing. She didn't know there was that whole story about the internet backlash being so bad that they literally redid the animation for that movie, which I know a lot of people do know that, I guess, but it's not like Spider-Man coming back to Disney or another one of those movie stories that a lot of people know, even the people that don't watch movie news and aren't in the movie bubble. But yeah, I guess I lost where I was going on that. But yeah, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, favorite movie of the year so far. Pretty solid on that, actually. Although that could change pretty quickly because the buzz, I guess, that I've been hearing about Top Gun is it is absolutely amazing. So I'm seeing that on Thursday. That's a movie that I would happily get up at midnight for and watch. But obviously they didn't, the whole story with that. They weren't going to let that go to streaming. They wanted to do it in theaters. And I'm excited about that. And luckily you don't have to go at midnight anymore. I think the preview screenings in my town start at like 4 or 5. So super stoked on that. Moving on to the next subject, and this